This feels terrible that we're kind of putting you on the spot now, but just to kind of explain to people how this came about, we have our morning meeting, we're sitting chatting, we were talking about what we were going to say to Toby, and we were going to talk about, you know, the EastEnders storyline. And, you know, obviously, because you have lived a lot of these things, it just seemed to hit you like a train.
Yeah.
Is that the way it felt?
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching the storyline as it's been building up, and each time I watch it, I just, you know, I don't even have hairs on my body, but the hairs are standing up just at the thought of it, and the similarities of it. You know, it started with, you know, I met this guy, he was charming, he was gorgeous, and he said all the right things. You look lovely, I love how you look, I love what you've got on. And then, you know, we started seeing each other. Then it got to, well, why are you wearing that? You look awful, that doesn't suit you, take it off. And then it moved to, you know, we're just having a conversation, and he punched my wall, and there was a massive hole in my wall in my flat, and I was like, OK. But then he apologised for it, so I let him off. It's like, OK, you know, maybe I did something. And then the second time he punched the door, and I had to end up telling people, oh, you know, the ironing board fell, and that's how the hole got there. I was papering up cracks and, you know, painting things to cover it.
And why did you do that? Why did you tell? Because that's often the way, isn't it, that people are so reluctant to say anything to anybody else. You were covering for him.
Well, I just didn't, you know, the first thing when I got together with him, my family weren't too happy with him, you know, but my family, that's the thing with families, they're never going to be happy with whoever you bring home. So I just thought, oh, you're just saying that. I'm fine, he's fine, we're fine. And we were fine for many, many months. It was like 6, 7 months before the first incident happened.
Which is interesting, if you go back to the EastEnders storyline, that they've built it over such a long period of time that when actually the turn happened, it was a real shock.
But by the first punch, I loved him, and I was in love with him. You know, and the second punch, the third time the wall, the fourth time, you know, the next... There were so many times, and then it was the last...
Absolutely unbelievable the first time.
It was more... I found myself asking, what have I done to deserve this, and what have I done? And I literally found myself talking to myself, and Brenda, what are you doing? You know, and that is just a sign of you're not in yourself. But it was like, you know, there was an instance where I bought some pies, some apple pies. You know, you get a selection of 6, and there was an apple pie in there, and I one of them was missing. I'd bought them, but one of them was missing. And he came home and he freaked out, and that was when he started strangling me. And it was the strangling that made me say, I've got to get out of this. I need to get out of this. But I didn't know how to, because I hadn't spoken to any of my family, because I thought if I speak to my family, then they're going to get involved, then this could turn even uglier, and then I'll be blaming myself for something else.
Did you have Tanisha at this point?
Yeah, I had both of the kids at this point. And so, you know, it was a case of, OK, what do I have to do? And then just seeing last night's episode, I did that, where I phoned my best friend and I told her what was going on. But because I hadn't said anything to her before, there was a bit of her saying, well, you've never said this to me before, so it can't be that bad, or else you wouldn't have been with him for that long. But it was a case of just getting the gumption and the, you know, the strength to do that. And so I asked my friends...
Well, because he's chipped away at you.
So, so I phoned my girlfriend and I said, OK, finally, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And we'd planned it, we planned what we were going to do. I put some things together in a bag, and she came to the flat to help take me and take the kids. And then he turned up, and I was in there, and I heard the key in the door, and again, the goose pimples, and there was a bit of a tussle that happened between me, my friend, and him. We got out, and then I kind of disappeared because I'd heard certain things that he wanted to do, so I sort of disappeared for a while. And then 2 years later, I thought everything was fine, and I'm picking myself back up again. I've got my life, I've got my place. And then there was a knock at the door, and it was him.
Oh, God.
He turned up 2 years later with some flowers. I don't know what the flowers were for. Me and my girlfriend, we kind of joked, say, oh, anniversary, man. You just turned up because it was my birthday. You weren't... I'd heard nothing from you before, and he turned up, and at that point, we'd finished for 2 years, but I hadn't started seeing somebody, but there was somebody upstairs. I said to them, go upstairs, because I knew that he was a bit volatile. Go upstairs so, you know, you're not involved. And then a massive argument came. He punched me in the face because he found out that somebody was upstairs thinking that something was going on with them, which it wasn't. So this person came downstairs and, unbeknown to me, he had a knife. And
Your ex had a knife?
My ex had a knife. And while he was threatening to do something with the knife, I had my phone at the side of me and I was texting my girlfriend saying, he's here with a knife, he's here with a knife. She called the police and then the police came. Before the police came, you know, he'd punched me in the face, he'd punched the person that was with me in the face.
Did you fear for your life?
I was totally scared. I spent a lot of time always thinking 4 steps ahead. So if I do this, what would happen there? And, you know, and if I do that, what would happen there? Maybe if I do that, then... And that's what my life was for a couple of years, 3-4 years.
What?
Did the children witness any of this, Brenda?
The strength to leave, and yet you were using an extraordinary amount of strength to stay, weren't you?
I loved
having to second guess everything,
yeah,
having to avoid any situation.
If somebody says sorry, then it's you know, the nice thing to do is to forgive and believe them and believe that they're sorry, you know. And I think obviously later on I've had some counselling. I went to see a counsellor and everything, and I think it was certain issues. I latch on to people very quickly. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm that person.
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of people see me as strong and you know, she's so bubbly. But there's, you know, I cover a lot of what's happened to me, and I'm like, well, you know, you've got to just carry on and fight with it. But watching that last night, it just brought it all back. We were talking this morning, and the horror that you feel when you think this is somebody you love, they could never do that to you. They would never do that to you. But then, you know, I'm really glad that I had the strength, but I didn't have the strength to talk to my family. I didn't have the strength to talk to my family because I thought,
again, we get
I felt
into
shame of
the
that.
language. You had the most enormous strength. And I mean, again, it often comes back to the person who is on the receiving end of this treatment, and we judge them and we think, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Why did you... We're not spending enough time looking at the perpetrator and thinking, you know, that this behaviour is reprehensible, unacceptable.
Yeah.
And you know, genuinely, Brenda, you know, thanks so much for speaking out about this. And I would like everyone to know that this is your choice and it wasn't easy.
Yeah, no. And, you know, I've done all the tears, but this is the good thing that the counsellor showed me. You know, when you cry, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're purging yourself and you're getting it all out of your system.
Yeah.
And that's, you know...
Yeah. Listen, we've got Sarah Davidge from Women's Aid with us with some practical advice for those affected by abuse. Hi there, Sarah.
Hello, thanks.
Hi, and I'm sure you're joining with us in saying that, you know, it takes a huge amount for Brenda or people in this situation to talk about such deep emotions that clearly they've had to wrestle with for a long period of time. So maybe just take a moment to say that, yeah?
Definitely. I was going to say, yeah, Brenda is so brave to talk about that. And the impact of domestic abuse goes on for years after you've experienced it. You're not alone in that, and please do reach out, because we can, you know, all see how that's affected you. The post-relationship abuse that you've described is really common, but also just the emotional impact on you for the rest of your life. And you're never going to know when something's going to trigger you. That's why EastEnders put out the warning about what's going to happen tonight, because something like that, they've being responsibility to survivors and women like yourself who've experienced that over dramatic effect and cliffhangers. And just, yeah, Brenda, please reach out.
That's a really interesting thing you've just said. That I've never thought of that. I always think about Women's Aid, like in the moment if it's happening. But but people can contact you years after, as you say, because the damage goes on for a long time.
Some of the stuff that we've been doing during COVID about the impact that's had on survivors, one of the really interesting things that came out of that wasn't just obviously women trapped at home with the abuser are experiencing heightened abuse, but women who'd left years later talked about how their emotional well-being, how they were triggered by the restrictions that we all had through lockdown. Because at the core of the control that's in domestic abuse, there's isolating you, there's restricting your freedoms, and we all actually had that through COVID restrictions. And for women who thought they'd moved on, that had been really triggering. And many of them have, you know, indicated as soon as they're able, they want to reach out for support.
Yeah.
So.
You know, in terms of practical advice, I think we've ably demonstrated, Brenda has, that it is so complex. But as Nadia said, I mean, just to know that you are there and other organisations are there for women. And, well, anyone who's abused, I should say that, at whatever stage of their journey.
Because it's men also.
Absolutely, and I correct myself on that. And also, thank you to Toby, because, you know, as a guy, for you to stand up and say we are all part of this, Toby, I think is also a really important message to give out, rather than us making this some kind of gender war, because it clearly isn't. Thank you very much to both of you there. And I am going to just read out that number just once more, the 24-hour National Domestic Abuse Helpline. It is free to call, 0808 2000 247.